Chapter 7 Anastasia's Russia. As Anastasia was telling me about the communities of the future which would be comprised of family domains, I asked her, "Anastasia, please show me the Russia of the future. I know you can." "Yes, I can. What place in the future Russia would you like to see, Vladimir?" "Well, how about Moscow? Would you like to go to the future alone, Vladimir, or together with me?" "It'd be a lot better with you. You can explain anything I see and don't understand." The touch of Anastasia's warm hand at once induced a sleepy state, and I started to see. Anastasia showed me the future of Russia, the same way she showed me life on another planet. At some point, scientists will probably understand just how she does this, but the means she used are quite irrelevant in this case. In my view, the most important thing is information about what specific actions will enable us to bring about this splendid future. The Moscow yet to come was nothing like I had imagined. The city had not expanded its geographical boundaries. There were no skyscrapers as I might have expected. The walls of the old houses were decorated in cheerful colors, and many were painted with pictures, landscapes, and flowers. I later found out that this was the work of foreigners. First, they covered the walls with some kind of plaster, and then artists, also from abroad, added the ornamentation. Intertwining vines hung down the roofs of many of the houses, their leaves rustling in the wind as though greeting the passers-by. Almost all the streets and avenues of the capital were planted with trees and flowers. Right down the middle of Kalinin Avenue, or the New Arbat, as it is called, stretched a green boulevard about 4 meters wide. Concrete curbs rose about a half a meter above the pavement, enclosing earthen beds from which sprouted grass and wild flowers, interspersed at brief intervals with various kinds of trees, rowans with their clusters of red berries, birches, poplars, currants, and raspberry bushes, and a host of other plants, such as one might find in a natural forest. There were similar boulevard strips down the center of many of Moscow's avenues and broad streets, and on the reduced traffic portion of these streets there didn't seem to be very many motor cars, mainly buses carrying passengers who did not look at all Russian in their appearance. The same could be said of many of the pedestrians on the sidewalks. I wondered for a moment whether Moscow had been occupied by a technically more developed country. But Anastasia reassured me, saying that the people I was seeing here were not occupiers, but simply foreign tourists. "And what draws them to Moscow?" I asked. "The atmosphere of a grand creation, refreshing air and water," came the reply. "Look and see how many people are standing along the banks of the Moskva River and collecting water in containers on strings they let down from the high embankments, and drinking the river water with great delight." "But how can they drink water straight from the river without boiling it first?" "Look and see, Vladimir, how pure and transparent the water is in the Moskva River. It contains living water, not water deadened by gases like the kind sold in bottles throughout the world." "It must be a fantasy, something impossible to believe." "A fantasy? But when you were little, would you and your friends have believed it if someone told you that before long people would be selling water in bottles?" "You're right. When I was young, nobody would have believed that. But how was it possible to make the water so pure in such a big city as Moscow?" "Stop polluting it, stop throwing harmful waste into it, and stop littering the riverbanks." "It was that simple?" "Exactly, nothing fantasy-like. It's actually all quite simple. Today, the Moskva River is protected even from the runoff water flowing over the pavement, and it is closed to dirty ships. They used to consider the Ganges in India sacred, but now the whole world adores the Moskva River and its water. They adore the people who restored the water to its pristine vitality, and people come here from many countries to see this wondrous marvel, taste the water, and find healing. And where are all the local residents? Why are there so few passenger cars in the streets? There are only about 1.5 million Muscovites actually living in the capital now, though the number of tourists from various countries can be more than 6 times that figure, replied Anastasia, and added, there are fewer cars because the remaining residents have managed to arrange their day on a more rational basis, reducing their need to move around. Their work is usually close by and close enough to walk, and the tourists get around using just the metro and the buses. And what's happened to all the other Muscovites? They live and work in their splendid family domains. Then who works in the plants and the factories? Who looks after the tourists? And Anastasia told me the following. As the year 2000, according to the accepted Earth calendar of the time, was drawing to a close, the Russian leadership was still in the process of determining the country's path of future development. The majority of Russian citizens were not particularly inspired by the path the so-called prosperous countries of the West were taking. Russians had already tried the food products from these countries, but did not have much of a taste for them. It turned out that the development of what was termed technical progress in these countries came hand in glove with various diseases of both the body and the soul. Crime and drugs became increasingly rampant, and women were less and less inclined toward childbearing. Russians were not attracted to the conditions in which the people of the developed nations lived. Neither did they wish to reinvent the old social order. But they had not yet seen any new path. An increasing mood of depression took hold of the country, affecting the whole society in ever greater numbers. Russia's population was aging and dying. At the beginning of the new millennium, at the initiative of the Russian president, a decree was signed granting free and unconditionally to each willing family 1 hectare of land whereon to establish a family domain. The decree allotted this land to the family for lifetime use, with the right to pass it on to their heirs. Any product grown in this domain would not be subject to taxation of any kind. Russian parliamentarians supported the president's initiative, and the Russian constitution was amended accordingly. The primary aims of the decree, in the eyes of the president and the parliamentarians, were reducing unemployment in the country, guaranteeing a minimum income level to needy families, and solving the refugee problem. But what subsequently happened was something none of them could have fully imagined. When the first allocation of land was made for organizing a community numbering more than 200 families, the plots of land in question were taken up not just by the needy, the unemployed, or poverty-stricken refugees, but primarily by middle-income families and their wealthy entrepreneurs who had read your books, Vladimir. They had been anticipating this turn of events, and they were not just idly waiting for it. Many of them had already been growing their own family trees in their apartments from seeds planted in clay pots, and the mighty cedars and oaks of the future were already sprouting their first little shoots. It was these entrepreneurs who initiated and financed plans for a community with an infrastructure facilitating a convenient lifestyle, as you wrote in your book, CoCreation. These plans provided for a store, a medical clinic, a school, a club, roads, and a lot else besides. In fact, entrepreneurs made up about half the number of people who expressed their desire to rearrange their life and daily routine to live in the first of the new communities. They all had their own businesses, their own source of income. For the actual construction work and setting up their plots of land, they required a labor force. The ideal solution, they discovered, was to hire their neighbors from among the needy families as construction and landscape workers. That way, some of these families got jobs right away, which gave them the wherewithal to finance their own construction projects. The entrepreneurs realized that nobody would prove to be more meticulous and efficient workers than those who were planning to live in the community themselves, and so external specialists would be hired only where such could not be found among the future community residents. Only the establishing of the future orchard and forest, and the planting of the family trees and living fences was something each family endeavored to do on their own. Most of them did not yet have enough experience or knowledge as to how to best establish their plot, and as a result, among the future residents, the elderly people who did have this knowledge commanded considerable respect. The principal focus was not on temporary structures, or even houses per se, but on the development of the landscaping. In each case, the actual buildings people were going to live in were considered just one small part of the larger living house of God. Within 5 years, houses for permanent residence had been built on all the lots. They were quite varied in size and architectural style, but it was soon evident that the greatest treasure of each domain was by no means the size of a house. The greatest treasure lay elsewhere, and it was not long before it took form and outline in the splendid landscaping elements of each plot in particular as well as of the community as a whole. The oaks and cedars planted in each plot were still very young, and each plot was surrounded by a living fence, which was only starting to grow. But with each new spring, apple and cherry trees, even though still quite small, came stridently into bloom in the young orchards, along with grass and flower beds that were doing their very best to resemble a splendid living carpet. The spring air was filled with delightful aromas and floral pollen. The air became truly invigorating, and every woman living in this new community had a desire to bear children. This happened not only in young families, but even people considered elderly suddenly began to bear children. People felt that even if they themselves did not live to see the splendid piece of their motherland their hands had created, they wanted their children to. They wanted their children to delight in the sight and continue the co-creation begun by their parents. At the beginning of the new millennium, in each plot, all living shoots represented the first shoots of a splendid, happy future for the whole earth. The people that established for centuries to come the first family domains had still not completely felt the significance of what they had done. They simply began looking more joyfully at the world around them. They were still not consciously aware of the great joy their actions were bringing to their Heavenly Father. The Father was sending tears of joy and tenderness upon the earth amidst the drops of the falling rain, and He smiled with the sunshine, and was endeavoring to use the little branches of young trees to give a secret caress to His children, who had suddenly become aware of eternity and had come back to Him. The Russian press began writing about the new community, and many people wanted to see this splendid phenomenon for themselves, so that they could create one of their own like it, perhaps even create a better one. Millions of Russian families were seized with the inspired desire for a splendid co-creation. Communities similar to the first one sprang up simultaneously in various regions of the country. An entire movement began, not unlike our contemporary Dasha movement. Within 9 years after the first decree was signed allowing people to establish their lives independently and make their lives happy, more than 30 million families had become involved in creating their own kin's domain, their own piece of the motherland. They have been cultivating their splendid plots of ground, using in the process living, everlasting materials created by God, and by so doing, they are creating together with Him. Each of these families turned their hectare of land provided for their lifetime use into a little corner of paradise. Against the backdrop of the vast spaces of the Russian motherland, a single hectare seemed like a very small piece indeed. But there were many such pieces, and all of them together made up a vast motherland. Through these pieces, all created by loving hands, the whole motherland flourished like a garden in paradise. This was their Russia. On each of the hectares were planted both evergreens and deciduous trees. People were already aware of how the trees themselves would fertilize the ground, and the balance in soil composition would be maintained by the grasses growing all around. And nobody had it even crossed their minds to use chemical fertilizers or toxic chemicals. The quality of Russia's air and water improved and became health-giving. The food shortage problem was completely resolved. Each family was able, easily and without undue effort, not only to produce for themselves from what grew in their domain, but also to sell their surplus. Every Russian family with its own domain started to become rich and free, and Russia as a whole began to grow into the most rich and powerful state in comparison with other countries in the world. Chapter 8. The Richest State. Hold on, Anastasia. I don't understand how the state as a whole suddenly got rich. You yourself said that the produce from family domains wasn't subject to any kind of tax, so what has made the state so rich? How can you possibly ask what? Think about it more carefully, Vladimir. You are an entrepreneur, after all. Well, since I am an entrepreneur, I happen to know that the state has always tried its hardest to squeeze just a little more tax out of every citizen. And here you tell me it's all gone and axed 30 million families from the tax toll? The families, of course, could have got very rich, but at the same time it should mean bankruptcy for the state. The state did not go bankrupt. First, unemployment was completely eliminated, since any man who found himself without a job in the industrial, commercial, or public sectors, as we all know them today, was able to devote himself either fully or partially to work, or putting it more specifically, to co-creation in his own domain. The total elimination of unemployment freed up significant financial resources. The abundant supply of food provided by the families with their own domains spared the state from any kind of expenditure on agricultural production. But more importantly, thanks to the vast number of families who established their domains in accordance with the divine plan, the Russian state received an income significantly higher than it realizes today from the sale of oil, gas, and other resources traditionally regarded as its basic source of income. What could possibly bring in more income than oil, gas, and arms sales? A great deal, Vladimir. For example, air, water, ethers, loveliness, contact with the energy of co-creation, the contemplation of pleasant things. It's still not completely clear, Anastasia. Couldn't you put it in more specific terms? Where did the money come from? I shall try my best. The extraordinary changes taking place in Russia attracted the attention of many people all over the globe. The world press began writing about the major change in lifestyle most Russians were experiencing. This became a burning issue for a good deal of the world's population. A huge flood of tourists began pouring into Russia. There were so many that wanted to come, it was impossible to accept them all, and many had to wait their turn, even as long as several years. The Russian government was forced to limit the length of stay by foreign tourists, since many of them, especially the elderly, were attempting to stay months and even years here. The Russian government collected huge levies from each foreigner entering the country, but this by no means reduced the number of those applying to come. But why did they want to visit here in person if they could see it all on TV? You did say the world press was enlightening people about life in the new Russia. People all over the world wanted to come. They wanted to breathe Russia's air, which had been so health-giving. They wanted to drink its living water, to take a taste of fruits unlike any other in the world, to talk with the people who were stepping forward into God's millennium, and thereby both slake their soul's thirst and heal their suffering bodies. And what unusual kinds of fruit appeared? What were they called? They're the same as they were called before, only the quality was completely different. You already know, Vladimir, how much better tomatoes and cucumbers taste when they are grown in the open air under the direct rays of the sun, in comparison to the hothouse varieties. While fruits and vegetables grown in soil free from harmful chemicals are even tastier and more healthful. They have even greater healing properties when grown in company of different kinds of herbs and trees. The mood and attitude of the grower also plays a role, and the ethers contained in the fruit also have a tremendous benefit for man. What do you mean by ethers? Ethers are fragrances. A fragrance you detect signifies the presence of an ether which feeds not only the body, but also the invisible essence of a man. Still not clear. Are we talking about the brain, perhaps? One could say that ethers strengthen mental energy and feed the soul. Such fruits were grown only in Russia, and the greatest benefit is realized when used by man on the day they are picked. And that is why so many people have come to Russia from all over the world to taste these fruits, among other things. Produce from the family domains very quickly took over the market, squeezing out not only imported fruits and vegetables, but those that were still growing in the ordinary large acreage fields. People began to appreciate and feel the difference in the quality of the produce. Pepsi Cola, and other soft drinks so popular today were replaced by fruit beverages made from natural berries. And even the most sophisticated and expensive liquors in today's societies could not compete with the sweet wines prepared from natural berries right in the domains. These drinks also contain beneficial ethers, since the people preparing them in their domains knew that once the berries were picked, they had only a few minutes to begin making them into fruit liquors and wines. An even greater source of income for families living from their groves, gardens, and surrounding meadows. In time, the harvest of medicinal herbs from Russia became a far more sought-after commodity than drugs manufactured abroad. But only the herbs collected in the family domain, and not those grown in specialized operations on huge tracts of land. A herb grown in a huge field among others of its own kind cannot take from the soil and surrounding space all the ingredients that are needful and useful to man. Even though the produce from the domains cost a great deal more than what was produced by the so-called industrial method, people all over the world still preferred it. And why did the owners of the domains jack up the price? Why didn't? The minimum price was set by the Russian government. The government? Why would it care? It doesn't get anything from the family domain productions. Why would it take pains to enrich individual families? You must remember, Vladimir, that the state itself consists of individual families, who, as the need arose, took to financing the infrastructures network in their communities. Schools and roads, for example. Sometimes they would put money into projects on a national scale. Politicians and economists would publish their projects, but only those which people put their money into passed. Tell me, what kinds of projects were most popular among the majority? The buying up of chemical conglomerates abroad, arms factories, and scientific institutes. Now there's a switch. You told me that these families had a conscious awareness of the divine, a sense of goodness, that it was thanks to them that the whole world was being transformed into a garden of paradise. And now you're talking about buying up chemical plants and arms manufacturing companies? But these ventures were not aimed at producing weapons or harmful chemicals, but at destroying the factories making them. The Russian government was involved in the redirection of international monetary flow, and the energy of money, which had been feeding what was fatally harmful for mankind, was now aimed at the liquidation of the same. And what happened? Did the Russian government have enough money for such extravagant projects? It did. Russia not only became the richest country in the world, but it became immeasurably richer than all the other countries. The whole world's capital started flowing into Russia. And not only the wealthy, but even people of modest means flocked to deposit their savings exclusively in Russian banks. Many wealthy people simply willed their savings to the development of the Russian projects. There were people who realized that the future of all mankind depended on these projects being carried out. Foreign tourists who had visited Russia and seen the new Russians could no longer live by their former set of values. They excitedly told their friends and acquaintances about what they had seen, and the flood of tourists kept getting bigger and bringing ever-increasing profits to the Russian state. Tell me, Anastasia, those people you know, who live in Siberia, what projects could they undertake and become as wealthy as the people in central Russia? After all, in Siberia the summer is shorter and you won't get very rich on growing garden produce. People in Siberia, Vladimir, also began setting up their domains. Siberians used their plots of ground to grow things suitable to their climate, and they had one big advantage over residents of more southern climates. Siberian families received state allotments in the taiga, and each family took care of its own land and harvested their gifts. And out of Siberia came health-giving berries and herbs, and cedar nut oil. And how much did cedar oil fetch on the international market in terms of dollars? 1 ton of cedar oil cost $4 million. Wow! Finally, it was priced at its true worth, which is 8 times higher than what it was fetching before. I wonder how much of this cedar oil the Siberians would have prepared in a season. In the year you are looking at now, 3,000 tons were produced. 3,000? Wow, that means they would have got $12 billion just for harvesting cedar nuts. More, in fact. You forgot that pressed cedar nuts can be made into excellent flour. So how much would an average Siberian family make in a year from their labors in terms of dollars? On average, $3 to $4 million. Wowee. And you mean to tell me they still don't pay any tax? No tax at all. In that case, where on earth could they spend money like that? Back when I worked in Siberia, I saw that anyone in a Siberian village who wasn't lazy could provide enough for himself by hunting and fishing. But here you're talking huge sums. Like other Russians, they invested their money in national government projects. For example, initially when the Russian people still had not discovered how to control the movement of the clouds, a great deal of the Siberians' money went to the purchase of airplanes. Airplanes? What would they need planes for? To ward off clouds containing harmful deposits. These clouds would form over countries where deadly industrial pollution was still permitted. They were fought off by Siberian aviators. And what about hunting? Has it been confined to reserved family allotments in the taiga? Siberians have totally stopped all hunting and the killing of animals. Many of them built summer residences on their allotments and spent their summers collecting herbs, berries, mushrooms, and nuts. Young creatures of the forest, right from birth, saw human beings as not a threat to them, and got accustomed to man as an integral part of their territory. They began communicating with people, making friends with them. The Siberians taught many creatures to help them. For example, squirrels would throw down cedar cones with ripe nuts onto the ground, which gave the squirrels no end of pleasure. Some people trained bears to pull heavy baskets and sacks with nuts and clear away trees felled by the wind. Really? They even got bears helping? There's nothing surprising in that, Vladimir. In times today, which people call ancient, a bear was one of the most irreplaceable helpers in the household. He would use his paws to dig edible tubers out of the ground and put them in a large basket, and then take it upon himself to drag the basket on a rope to a pit cellar hollowed out of the ground, not far from man's dwelling. He would climb trees in the forest to fetch log hives filled with honey and bring them back to man's dwelling. He would take man's children into the forest to gather raspberry treats, as well as do a lot of other things for the household. Wow, the bear replaced both the tractor and the plow, and brought home things to eat, and minded the children. And all winter long he slept, needing no maintenance or repairs. And when spring came, he would return to man's dwelling once more, and man would treat him to the fruits of the previous autumn. I see what's going on. A reflex was trained in those bears to make it seem as though man had stored up those supplies just for them. You could call it a reflex if that helps you gain a clearer understanding, but you could also say that it was designed by the father. I will only tell you that tubers were not the most important thing for the bears in the springtime. What was, then? After sleeping all alone in his lair the whole winter long, when he awoke in the spring, the first thing the bear did was hurry over to see man, to feel man's caresses and hear his praise. All the creatures need man's caresses. If dogs and cats are any example, you're right. But what about the other creatures in the taiga? What did they do? Gradually, all the other taiga dwellers found themselves a niche too. And the highest reward for these tamed residents of the territory was a tender word or gesture, or petting or scratching for those who had done an exceptionally good job. But they could get jealous of each other sometimes, if one of them seemed to win special favor from man. They could even have a quarrel over this. And what have Siberians been doing during the winter? Processing the nuts. Instead of husking the cones right after gathering them, the way it is done in our time for ease of transport, they keep the nuts stored in their resinous cones. The nuts keep that way for several years. Also, during the winter, women do handicrafts. For example, a handmade shirt woven out of nettle fibers and embroidered by hand fetches quite a handsome price today. And in winter time, Siberians receive people from all over the world and treat their ills. But Anastasia, if Russia has indeed become such a rich land for man to live in, surely that means that many other states have a desire to conquer Russia. Especially since you said the arms factories have been shut down. Are you telling me Russia has become, in fact, an agrarian country, unprotected against an external aggressor? Russia has not been transformed into an agrarian country. It has become a center for world science. And the factories manufacturing destructive weapons in Russia were eliminated only after people discovered an energy, before which the most up-to-date kinds of armaments not only proved useless, but even represented a threat to those countries which maintain them. What kind of energy is that? Where does it come from? And who discovered it? This energy was possessed by the Atlanteans, but they got hold of it too early, and so Atlantis disappeared from the face of the earth. And it was rediscovered by the children of the new Russia. Children? You'd better run all this by me in the proper order, Anastasia. Very well. Chapter 9. Good shall prevail on the earth. In one of the Russian domains lived a happy family, a husband, wife, and 2 children, a boy, Konstantin, who was 8, and a little 5-year-old girl named Dasha. Their father was considered one of the most talented computer programmers in Russia. His study at home contained several state-of-the-art computers on which he compiled programs for a government military agency. Sometimes he would linger at his computers well into the evening hours, completely absorbed in his work. The other members of the family, accustomed to gathering in the evenings, headed for his study, where each busied themselves with their own activities. The wife sat in a comfortable armchair and sewed. Their son read or drew sketches of the landscapes of the new settlements. Only 5-year-old Dasha would not always find herself an activity to her liking, in which case she would curl up in a chair with a good view of everyone else and spend a long time carefully observing each member of the family. Occasionally she would close her eyes, and her face would show a whole range of emotions. On what seemed to be a fairly routine evening, the family had gathered in the father's study as usual, each one busy in their own way. The study door was open, which meant that they could hear the cuckooing of an old-fashioned mechanical cuckoo clock on the wall of the children's room next door. Usually it would sound off only during the daytime hours, but now it was already evening, so the father glanced up from his work and stared at the door, while the other family members gave an astonished look in the same direction, all except for little Dasha, who simply sat in her chair, her eyes closed, apparently oblivious to everything. A smile, first barely noticeable, then quite evident, crept across her lips. All at once the clock cuckooed a second time, as though someone standing in the children's room had moved the hands forward to announce the next hour. Ivan Nikiforovich, as the father of the household was called, turned his swivel chair in the son's direction and said, "Kostya, Please go and see if you can fix the clock or at least stop it. We've had it a long time, that gift of grandfather's. Strange how it got broken like that. Strange. See if you can do something about it, Costilla. The children were always obedient, not out of fear or punishment. In fact, they were never punished. Costilla and Dasha loved and respected their parents. They got the highest pleasure out of doing something together or carrying out their parents' wishes. Upon hearing his father's request, Costilla at once rose from his seat, but to his mother's and father's surprise, did not head for the children's room. Instead, he just stood and stared at his younger sister sitting in the armchair with her eyes closed. Then once again they heard a cuckooing from the next room, but Costilla still stood there and stared, his eyes fixed on his sister. Galina, their mother, looked concernedly at her son, who remained rooted to the spot. All at once she got up and cried out in fright, "Costilla, Costilla, what's the matter with you?" The 8-year-old boy turned to his mother, wondering what she was frightened about, and replied, "Everything's fine with me, Mama. I wanted to do as Papa asked, but I can't." "Why not? Are you unable to move? You're unable to go to your room?" "I can move," replied Costilla, waving his arms about and stamping his feet on the spot to prove it. "But there's no point in my going to our room. She's here, and she's stronger." "Who's here? Who's stronger?" Mother started getting more and more upset. "Dasha," Costilla replied, pointing to his younger sister in the armchair, her eyes closed with a smile on her face. "She's the one who's been moving the hands forward. I tried to put them back in place, but I can't do it when she—" "What are you talking about, Kostienka?" Mother interrupted. "You and Dashenka are both here with us. I can see you. How can you two be here and at the same time move the clock hands in the other room?" "Well, yes, we're here," answered Costilla, "but our thoughts are in the other room where the clock is. Only her thought is stronger. That's why the clock keeps cuckooing. Her thought is speeding up the hands. She's been playing a lot of tricks like that lately. I told her not to. I knew it might upset you, but Dasha doesn't care. All she has to do is fall into a state of contemplation, and she starts thinking up something." "What is Dasha contemplating on?" Ivan Nikiforovich broke into the conversation. "And Kostya, why didn't you say anything about this earlier? You yourself can see how she's contemplating. The clock hands aren't important. She's just amusing herself. I can move the hands too when nobody's interfering. Only I can't contemplate like Dasha. When she's in a state of contemplation like that, there's no way anyone can counteract her thought." "What is she contemplating on? Do you know, Kostya?" "Sorry, why don't you ask her yourself? I'll stop her contemplation before she thinks up anything else." Kostya went over to the chair his sister was sitting in and said distinctly in a louder than normal voice, "Dasha, stop thinking. If you don't stop, I shan't speak to you for a whole day. And besides, you frighten Mama." With a flutter of her eyelashes, the little girl surveyed everyone present in the room with an observing glance, and as though literally waking up, jumped up from her chair and hung her head apologetically. The cuckooing stopped, and for a while the study was enveloped in complete silence. A silence eventually broken by Dasha's apologizing voice. She raised her head, looked at her Mama and Papa with her sparkling, tender eyes, and said, "Mamochka, Papochka, forgive me for frightening you. But I had to. I just had to finish thinking it through. This thought I had. Now I can't help but think it through. I'll be thinking it through tomorrow, too, when I've had a rest." The girl's lips trembled. It seemed just as though she were about to break into tears, but she continued. "You, Kostya, can refuse to talk with me if you like, but I'll go on contemplating it all the same, until I think it through." "Come to me, daughter dear," said Ivan Nikiforovich, trying to act restrained. He held out his arms to his daughter, ready to embrace her. Dasha rushed toward her father, jumped up on his knees, and put her little arms around his neck, pressed her cheek briefly against his, then jumped down and stood beside him, bending her head down to him. Ivan Nikiforovich, for some reason, had a hard time hiding his emotion. He began telling his daughter, "Don't worry, Dashenka. Mama will no longer get frightened when you contemplate. Just tell us what you're thinking about. What is so important to think through, and why do the clock hands move forward so fast when you're thinking? You see, Papochka, I want to make everything that's nice even bigger in time, and everything that's bad tiny and unnoticeable. Or even, I want to think it through so that the hands skip over the bad things and they aren't there anymore. But what is nice and what is bad doesn't depend on the clock hands, Dashenka." "It doesn't depend on the hands, Papochka, I realize that. But I move them along so's I can feel the time. The cuckoo counts off the speed of my thinking, 'cause I have to get it done in time. That's why I move the hands." "How do you do that, Dashenka?" "It's simple. I picture the hands of the clock out of the corner of my thought. Then I think they should go faster, and they go faster when I start thinking fast." "What do you want to achieve, daughter dear, by speeding up time? What don't you like about the present time?" "I like it. I realize now that time isn't to blame. It's people themselves who spoil their time. You, Papochka, are so often at your computer, and then you go away for a long time. You, Papochka, spoil the time when you go away." "Me? Spoil it? How so?" "We have a good time when we're all together. When we're together, we have a very good minutes and hours, even days. Everything around is joyful. Do you remember, Papochka, when the apple tree began to bloom just a little? You and Mama saw the first buds, and you took Mama in your arms and swirled around. And Mamochka laughed so brightly that everything around was joyful with us, the leaves on the trees and the little birds too. And I didn't feel sore at all about you twirling Mama around in your arms instead of me, 'cause I love our Mamochka very much. I was so happy with that time, just like everyone else. But then a different time came. I realize now that it was you, Papochka, who made it different. You went away from us for a very long time. Baby apples had even begun to appear on the apple tree, but you still didn't come home. And Mamochka went up to the apple tree and stood there all by herself. But there was nobody there to twirl her around, and she didn't laugh brightly, and nothing around had anything to be joyful about. And Mamochka has quite a different smile on her face when you're not around. It's a sad smile, and that is a bad time." Dasha spoke quickly and excitedly. All at once she seemed to choke on something inside her, and then burst out. "You shouldn't make it bad when it is good. Time, Papochka." "Dasha, you're right about one thing, of course. But you don't know everything about the times we're all in, the times we live in." Ivan Nikiforovich spoke disconnectedly. He was feeling tense. Somehow he needed to explain how necessary it was for him to go away, to explain it in such a way that his little daughter could understand. Finding no better alternative, he began telling her about his work, showing her rocket models and schematics on the computer. "You see, Dashenka, of course it's good for us here, and it's good for those who live in our neighborhood too. But there are other places, other countries in the world, and they've got a lot of weapons, all sorts of them. To protect our splendid garden and the gardens and the houses of your friends, sometimes Papa has to go away. Our country must also have a lot of up-to-date weapons to defend itself. But recently, Dashenka, you see, recently in another country, not ours, they came up with a new kind of weapon. For the time being, it is stronger than ours. Look here on the screen, Dashenka." And Ivan Nikiforovich gave a tap on the keyboard, and an image of a strange kind of missile appeared on the screen. "Look, Dashenka, this is a large missile, and it holds 56 smaller missiles. The large rocket takes off at man's command and heads for its assigned target to destroy everything living there. This missile is very hard to shoot down. When any object approaches it, an onboard computer kicks in and sends out one of the smaller missiles to destroy the object. The smaller missiles can travel faster than the big one, since when they're launched they can use the inertia speed of the larger missile to shoot down just one such monster. We need to send 57 missiles out against it. The country producing this so-called cassette missile has only 3 working models at the moment. They have been carefully concealed in various places, in shafts deep underground, but it only takes a single radio-transmitted command to launch them. A small group of terrorists are already blackmailing a number of countries, threatening to wreak havoc on them. So you see, Dashenka, I have to decode the program of the cassette missile's onboard computer. Ivan Nikiforovich got up and walked around the room. He continued talking rapidly, getting more and more absorbed in his thoughts about the program, seemingly oblivious to his little girl standing beside the computer. Ivan Nikiforovich quickly went over to the monitor showing the external image of the missile, gave a tap on the keyboard, and the screen showed a schematic of the missile's fuel supply system, then one of the targeting radar devices, and then once more an overall image. Even as he was switching the screen images, Ivan Nikiforovich was no longer paying attention to his dear little daughter. He kept reasoning aloud. They have obviously equipped each one of the smaller missiles with a targeting radar device. Of course, that would apply to every single one, but there can't be any difference in the programs. The programs have to be identical. All at once, the other computers emitted an alarm sound demanding immediate attention. Ivan Nikiforovich quickly turned to the respective monitor and froze in his seat. The screen showed a blinking text message. Emergency alert, emergency alert. Ivan Nikiforovich gave a quick tap on the keyboard and an image of a man in a military uniform appeared on the screen. What's happened? Ivan Nikiforovich asked him. 3 unusual explosions have been recorded, responded the man. The whole defense complex has been put on emergency alert. Explosions of lesser magnitude are continuing. There's been an earthquake in Africa. Nobody's offered any explanations. According to international information exchange networks, all military blocks on the planet have been ordered to high alert. Still no determination where the attack originated from. The explosions are continuing and we're trying to shed light on the situation. All personnel have been ordered to set about analyzing the situation. The officer on the screen spoke in a clipped military fashion. At the end, his voice was already betraying signs of concern. Explosions continuing, Ivan Nikiforovich, explosions continuing. I'm signing off. The officer's image disappeared from the screen. Ivan Nikiforovich, however, continued to stare at the darkened monitor, intensely absorbed in thought. Slowly and pensively, he turned in the direction of his chair, where Dasha was still standing as before. All at once, an incredible conjecture made him shudder. He saw how his little daughter, her eyes screwed up and unblinking, was staring at the screen, showing the image of the modern missile. Suddenly, her little body gave a start. Then, letting out a sigh of relief, she hit the enter button on the keyboard. When the image of the new missile appeared, she screwed up her eyes again and began staring intently at the monitor. Ivan Nikiforovich stood as though paralyzed, incapable of budging from the spot, feverishly asking himself, though only in his thoughts, the same question over and over again. Could she have set off the explosions? Set them off by her thought? 'Cause she doesn't like the bombs? Did she blow them up? Could that be true? How? He wanted to stop his daughter and called out to her, but he did not have the strength to speak very loudly and could only whisper, Dasha, Dashenka, my daughter, my dear daughter, stop it. Costilla, who had observed the whole scene, quickly got up from his seat, ran over to his sister, gave her a little pat on the bottom, and began talking at a rapid pace. Now, Dashka, you've gone and upset Papa this time. Now I shan't speak to you for 2 whole days. 1 day for Mama, the other for Papa. Do you hear? Do you hear what I'm saying? You frightened them. Gradually emerging from her state of concentration, Dasha turned to her brother and let her face resume its normal appearance as she looked him pleadingly and apologetically in the eye. Costilla noticed Dasha's eyes were filling with tears. Putting his hand on her shoulder, he spoke to her with a less severe tone than before. Okay, I got carried away about not talking to you, but you'll have to tie your own hair ribbon in the mornings. You're not so little anymore, you know. And telling her not to think about crying, he embraced her tenderly. The little girl nuzzled her face up against her brother's chest, her shoulders trembling as she sorrowfully repeated, I've gone and frightened them again. I'm a very naughty girl. I wanted to do the best I possibly could, but I've gone and frightened them. Galina came over to the children, squatted down beside them, and began stroking Dasha's head. The girl threw her arms around her mother's neck and sobbed quietly. How does she do it, Kostya? How? Ivan Nikiforovich asked his son as he slowly came to himself. The same way that she moves the hands of the clock, Papa, replied Kostya. But the clock is right here while the missiles are a long ways away and their location is classified as top secret. Papa, it doesn't matter to Dasha where they're located. All she needs to see is the outward appearance of the object. But the explosions, in order to set them off, the circuits have to be connected. Quite a few circuits at that. There are safety mechanisms, codes. But Papa, Dasha's able to go through all the circuits until the connection is made. Before it took her a long time to do that, maybe 15 minutes, but lately she's got it down to a minute and a half. Before? Yes, Papa, only not with missiles. That was the way we played. After she started moving the clock hands forward, I showed her my old electric car I used to love riding and when I was little. You see, Papa, I opened the bonnet and asked her to connect the headlamp wires together, since it was hard for me to get at them myself. She did it. And when she asked to take it for a drive, I told her she was still too young and wouldn't be able to brake properly, or even switch on the motor. But then, when she kept insisting, I gave in. I explained how to switch the motor on, but Dasha did it all her own way. I tell you, Papa, Dasha simply sat down behind the wheel and took off without switching on anything. She thought she was switching it on, but I could see that she wasn't doing anything with her hands. Or rather, she was switching it on, but she did it mentally. Besides, Papa, she's made friends with microbes. They obey her. With microbes? What microbes? With the ones that are very prolific, that live everywhere, all around us and inside us. We can't see them, but they're there. Do you remember, Papa? Over on the edge of our domain in the forest, there used to be the remains of 2 metallic posts sticking out of the ground. They belonged to an old high-voltage electricity line. I remember them. What of them? They were rusty, resting on the concrete foundations. One day, when Dasha and I went mushroom picking, she noticed these remains, said what a bad thing they were, that they weren't allowing the berries and mushrooms to grow on that spot. Then she said, you should eat them up, very, very fast. And a couple of days later, those rusty remains and the concrete foundations were gone. There was only bare earth there, without grass, at least for now. The microbes had eaten the metal and the concrete. But why, oh why, Kostya, didn't you tell me earlier about everything that was going on with Dasha? I was afraid, Papa. Afraid of what? I was reading up on history. In the recent past, people with unusual abilities have been subject to forced isolation. I wanted to tell you and Mama all about it, but I couldn't find the right words so that you'd understand and believe. Kostya, you know we always believe you. Besides, you could show us, or rather ask Dasha to demonstrate her abilities, only with something harmless. That's not what I was afraid of, Papa. Of course she could show you. Kostya fell silent, and when he spoke again, his voice was emotional. Papa, I love you and Mama. And even though I'm strict with Dashinka sometimes, I love her very much too. She is kind. Dasha is good to everything around her. She wouldn't even hurt a little bug, nor would they hurt her. She went up to a beehive one day, sat right down by the hive entrance and watched. She watched how they flew, the bees. A lot of bees crawled all over her arms and legs and even over her cheeks, but they didn't sting her. She held out her hand to the bees buzzing around her. They landed on it and left something there. Afterward, she licked the palm of her hand and laughed. "She's kind, Papa." "Calm yourself, Costilla. Don't worry. Let's calmly examine what's going on here. Yes, we have to think about it calmly. Dasha is still a child. She's blown up several state-of-the-art missile complexes. She could start a world war, a terrible war. But even without a war, say she looked through some pictures showing not only enemy missiles, but our own. Say she started detonating all the missiles in all the countries that have them. The world would be on the verge of a global catastrophe. Hundreds of millions of human lives could be lost. I too love our little Dasha, but millions? I need some advice. We must find a way out. But for now, I simply don't know. Dashenka needs to be isolated somehow. Somehow, yeah, maybe she needs to be put to sleep for a while. Maybe. But what's the solution? How can we possibly find a way out? Papa, hold on. Maybe it's possible to eliminate all the deadly missiles she doesn't like from the whole face of the earth. Eliminate? But we'd need a multilateral agreement from all the military blocs. Yeah, but there's no way we can get one quickly, if we can get one at all. In the meantime, Ivan Nikiforovich gave a sudden start and rushed over to his computer, where the monitor still showed the image of a missile, which Dasha was prevented from destroying. He switched off the monitor, then sat down on his communications computer and began to transmit the following text. To headquarters. The following memo should be transmitted at once to all military blocs and international news media. The series of missile complex explosions was caused by bacteria capable of connecting circuits. These bacteria are controllable. It will be necessary to destroy all images of any live ammunition. All images, from the most minute bullet to the most modern missile complex. The location of the explodable object is immaterial to the controller of the bacteria, who only needs to see its shape in an image. Ivan Nikiforovich looked at Dasha, who by this time was smiling and having a lively conversation with her mamma. He then added the following text. The location of the installation controlling the explosions is unknown. Finally, Ivan Nikiforovich encoded the transmission and dispatched it to headquarters. The next morning there was an emergency meeting of Russia's Security Council. A security detachment was posted to stand guard around the community where Ivan Nikiforovich's domain was situated. The security personnel dressed as road repair workers so as not to draw attention to themselves. They pretended to be building a 5-kilometer-long road around the perimeter of the community, working on all 5 kilometers at once, maintaining round-the-clock shifts. Video cameras were set up in Ivan Nikiforovich's domain, which followed every move of little Dasha's life. The video images were transmitted to a central monitoring station resembling a launch site mission control. The video monitors were managed in shifts by dozens of specialists, including psychologists and military personnel, ready to issue the required orders in case of an emergency situation. The psychologists used special communication devices to give a constant stream of recommendations to Dasha's parents on how to distract her, whatever way they could, and keep her from falling into a state of contemplation again. The Russian government put out an international statement, which many people thought strange, to the effect that in Russia there were forces capable of blowing up any type of live ammunition, no matter where it was located in the world. These forces, it said, were not entirely under the control of the Russian government, although negotiations were underway. The extraordinary nature of this statement called for some kind of confirmation to back it up. At an international council meeting, it was decided to prepare a series of unusual-looking projectiles, mounted in square casings. Each country participating in the experiment took 20 such projectiles and hid them in various places in their respective territories. Why did they make the projectiles with square casings? Why couldn't they have just used ordinary ones? I asked Anastasia. They were afraid, Vladimir, that not only all the existing projectiles in the world might explode, but that all the bullets in the police and army pistols might get blown up as well. Wherever there were guns with live ammunition. Yes, of course. And how did the square projectiles experiment go? Calling his daughter into the study, Ivan Nikiforovich showed her a photo of a square projectile and asked her to blow them up. Dasha took a look at the photo and said, "I love you very much, Papochka, but there is no way I can do what you ask." "Why?" asked Ivan Nikiforovich in amazement. "Because it won't work with me." "What do you mean, Dashenka? It worked before. You blew up a whole series of modern missiles, and now it won't work?" "You know, back then I was really upset, Papochka. I didn't want you to go away or spend so many hours in front of your computer. When you're at your computer, you don't talk with anyone and you're not doing anything that's interesting. But now, well, you're with us all the time. You've become very good, Papochka. And I can't make any more explosions." At this point, Ivan Nikiforovich realized that Dasha was unable to blow up the square projectiles because she didn't understand the purpose of the explosion, what it was for. Ivan Nikiforovich started nervously pacing back and forth, feverishly searching for possible solutions and trying to convince Dasha to do something. But even as he was talking to his daughter, it seemed as though he were mainly reasoning it out for himself. "It won't work. No, it won't. Pity. Wars have been around for thousands of years. While wars have ended between some countries, others have been fighting. Millions of people have perished, and they are still perishing today. Tremendous resources are being wasted on armaments. And here finally is an opportunity to stop this endless disaster scenario. But alas." Ivan Nikiforovich looked at Dasha sitting at the chair. His daughter's face was composed. She watched with interest as he walked about the room, constantly talking. But she was not fascinated by what he was actually saying. She did not have a full comprehension of what wars meant, what resources her father was talking about, and who was wasting them. She was immersed in her own thoughts. Why is Papa so agitated, walking back and forth amidst these computers which don't show any affection and don't give us any energy? Why doesn't he want to go out into the garden where the trees are in bloom and the birds are singing? Where every blade of grass and every branch of tree caresses the whole body with something invisible. That's where Mama and Costilla are right now. I only wish Papa would finish his boring conversation and the two of us could go together to the garden. Mama and Costilla will be so happy to see us. Mama will smile, and Costilla promised yesterday he would tell me about how to touch a faraway star by putting your hand on a stone or a flower. Costilla always keeps his promises. Dashenka, are you bored listening to me? You don't understand what I've been saying? You're thinking about something else? I've been thinking, Papochka, why are we here and not in the garden, where they're waiting for us? Ivan Nikiforovich realized that he had to speak to his daughter sincerely and in specific terms, so he took a different track. Dashenka, when you blew up the missiles by looking at their image, they wanted you to test that ability once more. Or rather, to show the whole world Russia's ability to destroy all the ammunition on the planet. Then there won't be any point in making it anymore. It would be senseless and dangerous. As for the ammunition already existing, the people themselves will destroy it. A global disarmament will begin. The square projectiles were made especially so that you could show your ability without killing anyone. Blow them up, Dashenka. I can't do that anymore, Papochka. Why? Earlier you could, now you can't? I promised myself I would never blow up anything again, and now that I've made that promise, I don't have the ability to do it anymore. You can't? But why did you make such a promise to yourself? Costilla showed me some pictures from a book of his, pictures of parts of bodies strewn all over after an explosion. He showed me how people are frightened by explosions, how trees fall and die from explosions, and so I promised myself. Dashenka, does that mean you'll never be able to now? Just once more, just once. You see these square projectiles? Ivan Nikiforovich again held out the photo of a square projectile for his daughter to see. They were specially made for this experiment and are hidden away in secluded places in various countries. There are no people around or anywhere near them. Everyone's waiting to see whether they'll explode or not. Blow them up, daughter dear. That won't be breaking your promise. Nobody will perish. On the contrary." Dasha looked again at the photo indifferently and calmly replied, "Even if I go back on my promise, these projectiles still won't explode, Papushka." "But why not?" "Because you've been talking for so very long, Papushka. When I first looked at the photo, I couldn't stand these horrid things right off. They're ugly. And now what, Dashenka, what? Please forgive me, Papushka, but you went on talking for so long after you showed me the picture that by now they've been almost all eaten up." "Eaten up? What's been eaten up?" "Those square projectiles. They're almost all eaten up. As soon as they realized they couldn't stand the projectiles, they got into action and began to eat them up very fast." "Who are they?" "You know, the little ones. They're everywhere around us and inside us. They're good. Costilla calls them bacteria or microorganisms, but I've got my own name for them, a better name. I call them my little ones, my goodies. They like that name better. I play with them sometimes. People hardly pay any attention to them, but they always try to do good for everyone. When man is joyful, they feel good too from the joyful energy. When man is angry or hurts something living, a lot of them perish. Others rush to replace them. But sometimes the others don't manage to replace the ones that have died, and man's body becomes ill." "But you are here, Dashenka, and the projectiles are far away in various countries, hidden underground. How is it possible for those little ones of yours in other lands to find out so quickly about what you desire?" "You see, they tell everything to each other very fast along a chain, a lot faster than the electrons run in your computer." "Computer? Communications? That's it. I'll check it now. Video cameras have been set up around all the projectiles in our territory. It'll just take a moment." Ivan Nikiforovich turned to his communications monitor, which was showing a picture of a square projectile, or rather what remained of a projectile. The casing was rusty and full of holes, while the warhead was lying to one side, significantly reduced in size. Ivan Nikiforovich switched to another camera and another, but the same thing was happening to all the projectiles. Now the screen showed an image of a man in military uniform. "Hello, Ivan Nikiforovich. You've seen it all yourself by now. What conclusions has the council come to?" asked Ivan Nikiforovich. "The council members have divided into groups and are currently in consultation. Our security forces are trying to work out supplementary measures to ensure the object's safety." "I'll thank you not to call my daughter an object." "You're nervous, Ivan Nikiforovich. That's not permissible under the circumstances. In 10 minutes you'll be getting a visit from a panel of experts comprising of prominent specialists, psychologists, biologists, radioelectronic engineers. They're already on their way. I want you to set up an interview for them with your daughter. Prepare her ahead of time." "What opinion is the majority of the council inclined to favor?" "At the moment they are leaning toward totally isolating your family within the confines of your domain. You need to immediately remove all technical pictures from your daughter's sight. Stay close to her and try to follow her every move." Upon arriving at Ivan Nikiforovich's domain, the panel of experts sent by the Russian Security Council engaged little Dasha in a lengthy conversation. After the child had been patiently answering all the adults' questions for about an hour and a half, everyone, including the observers following the interview on the huge video monitor at the Security Council's communication center, were suddenly thrown into a state of utter bewilderment when the door of Ivan Nikiforovich's study opened, and in walked Dasha's brother Kostya, carrying the cuckoo clock which was now cuckooing incessantly. Kostya put the clock down on the table. The hand showed 11 o'clock, but no sooner had the mechanical bird given the requisite number of cuckoos than the big hand on the clock, quickly traced a full circle around the clock face, and the cuckooing began all over again. Those present were amazed at the strange operation of the clock, alternating their silent gaze between the clock and Dasha. "Oh!" all at once Dasha exclaimed, "I quite forgot. I have to go on a very important errand. That's my friend Varunka, turning the clock hands. That was our arrangement, just in case I forgot. I have to go." 2 guards blocked the door of the study. "What might you have forgotten, Dashenka?" Ivan Nikiforovich asked his daughter. "I might have forgotten to go to the domain where my friend Varunka lives and stroke her little flower and water it. And it really misses being caressed. It loves people to look at it tenderly." "But it's not your flower," observed Ivan Nikiforovich. "Why can't your friend stroke it herself, her own flower?" "Paposhka, you see, Varunka's gone visiting with her parents." "Where's she gone visiting to?" "Somewhere in Siberia." From all around the room, whispered exclamations could be heard. "She's not alone? What kind of abilities does her friend have? She's not alone. How many of them are there? How can we tell who they are? We need to take measures immediately regarding every child like that." But all the exclaiming ceased directly. An elderly, gray-haired gentleman rose from his seat at the side of the room. This man had the most senior title and position of all, and not just in relation to those present in Ivan Nikiforovich's study. He was the chairman of the Russian Security Council. Everyone turned to him in reverent silence. The elderly fellow looked at Dasha sitting in her little wooden chair, and a tear rolled down his cheek. Then he slowly went over to Dasha and knelt down on one knee in front of her, holding out his hand to her. Dasha rose and took a step to one side, holding the frilled hem of her dress. She made a curtsy and put her little hand in his huge palm. The elderly man looked at her for some time. Then, bowing his head, he kissed Dasha's hand in respect, saying, "Please forgive us, little goddess." "My name is Dasha," the girl answered. "Yes, of course your name is Dasha. Tell us, Dasha, what will prevail on our earth?" The little girl looked into the elderly man's face in surprise, bent closer to him, and with the palm of her hand carefully wiped away the tear from his cheek, then touched his mustache with her finger. Then she turned to her brother and said, "Kostienka, you also promised to help me talk with the lilies on Varunka's pond. Remember you promised?" "I do remember," Kostya replied. "Then let's go. In the doorway, having already passed by the guards which had stepped aside as she approached, Dasha turned in the direction of the elderly fellow still standing on one knee, smiled at him, and stated confidently, "On the earth shall prevail. Good shall prevail." 6 hours later, speaking before an expanded session of Russia's Security Council, the elderly chairman said, "Everything in the world is relative to our generation. Those in the new generation may seem to us to be like gods. It is not up to them to align themselves with us, but for us to align ourselves with them. The entire military might of the planet, with its unique technological achievements, has proved itself powerless before a single little girl of the new generation. And our job, our duty, our obligation to the new generation is simply to clear away the garbage. We must make every effort to rid the earth of any kind of armaments. Our technological achievements and discoveries, embodied in the most modern and, it seemed to us, unique military complexes, proved nothing more than useless scrap in the face of the new generation, and we must clear it away."